welcome to this week's episode of the Inclusive Networker podcast. I am so excited that you all are here. I am your host, Dr. Ramona, and who am I calling into conversation? Well, it is Leah Leonard. Leah, I am so excited to have you here. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you, and then we are going to get started. So, as a professional figure outer, Leah looks through her lens from the creative, entrepreneurial, and nonprofit worlds to deepen our understanding of what it means to do good work. She creates collaborative communities wherever she has the privilege of working, and on the journey so far, this includes more than 15 years in the top 1 to 2% of field leadership for Arbonne, her favorite B Corporation. More than 10 years in artistic collaboration with New York City-based Broken Box Mime Theater, and more than 13 years in partnership with the community surrounding Kisimani School in Arusha, Tanzania, where she had the joy of living and learning for 5 years. With Kisimani School, it began as a parent-led vision for education access and equity for their kids, championing a charter to teach the private school curriculum in a public school setting, equalizing academic opportunity despite the economic disadvantage. It has grown to support over 1,500 enrolled students, been ranked the #1 academic performing school in the region. They had a 4-year in a row 100% graduation rate, with all graduates being accepted to secondary school. And it is sustainable, run by the local government and community, with Leah's nonprofit providing support for special projects that further their vision. Leah is most at home exploring the world, but currently lives in Boulder, Colorado with her family. In her podcast, The Good Work Podcast, and her consulting program, she harnesses her passion for people to empower us all to step into a purpose more fully and have fun doing it. So, Leah, I am so honored. Oh my goodness, what a power-packed bio you have of all the things that you've done, not only here, but globally. And I'm so excited to have this perspective today. So welcome to the Inclusive Networker podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Honored, I'm delighted, and thanks for having me.
So the first question that I always ask my guests is, what is your lens? What's your background? How did you get to this point? How do you kind of see the world?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this before we started, and if I had to describe my lens, it is a person that didn't really know she had a lens before she had to examine that.
Okay.
And my lens is, middle class, and then later upper middle class, East Coast, white presenting, liberal, Jewish, female, cis het person, from what I didn't know until I left it, the most educated county in our country. So I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, surrounded by a lot of PhD people, and I was kind of in this very high achieving ecosystem, and I didn't really realize that until I exited it, which is interesting. But I think that's kind of the origins of my lens, and kind of what I look through today is a curious learner, trying to have a lifelong learning mindset as I expand and try new things along the way. So that's me.
Yeah, so welcome, and I love hearing that, and I'm really interested in kind of the evolution of your lens, because you talked about where you came from and how you didn't realize how much It was the most educated place in the country. There was certain privilege that you had there and that you were surrounded by. And now you're going to other countries and setting up schools and all of that. So there had to be some sort of process that happened in between there. So talk about the evolution of your lens.
Yeah, well, I think there's two sides. What we hear a lot, like you can't view what you can't see, right? We talk a lot about
Mm-hmm.
representation, particularly these days, and I
Mm-hmm.
think what I can see in hindsight that really evolved along my journey is not really realizing the models that I had um, along the way for what it looked like to give back and to use my privileges as a source for generosity and a place coming from a place of responsibility. I was always told that, with great power comes great responsibility. And I had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of wonderful models, in my family. I think of my father and my grandfather and seeing them kind of, bring themselves up and how they expressed their own ways of serving and quote unquote giving back. I had those
Mm-hmm.
models. I had a lot of models within the network marketing industry of what does it look like to do the most good with the time freedom that you have once you've built a sustainable business, right? I had those models.
Mm-hmm.
I had models of what it looked like to go and help internationally. I remember reading a book called Three Cups of Tea when I was in college, and I had all of these models, and they were inspiring. And when I felt this nudge to go and collaborate with this community, I think it's human nature. We kind of look for, okay, well, who are my mentors? Who's gone before me? Who has already figured out this process, and how can I shorten my learning curve in order to do this new work, right? Whatever kind of work it
Mm-hmm.
is that we're stepping into. And the interesting thing about the evolution of the lens in from that perspective is that I didn't really realize along the way that some of those tracks that I was given to run on were not necessarily in line with my personal values. And I would have these little gut
Mm-hmm.
feelings and kind of gut tugs along the way of feeling, well, working in this way doesn't feel quite right, or talking about this
Mm-hmm.
project in this way doesn't feel quite right. Sharing photos of the kids who live in the community that we're working with in this way doesn't feel quite right. And I would have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of gut checks, but I didn't really have the words to name it yet. And so I think looking back, realizing that, some of the models that we have for how to do good work are in fact perpetuating, harmful narratives certainly around saviorism
Mm-hmm.
and and when we have those gut feelings, it's that innate trigger where we all have this internal sense of we know right from wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's hard to separate that from thinking, okay, but this is how it's been done by the
Mm-hmm.
people who've gone before me, and they've been
Yeah.
recognized, right? They've received
Mm-hmm.
recognition for doing something
Yeah.
good. So I must have to follow this model. And I think we can crack that wide open, and I think we can
Mm-hmm.
re-examine, um, yeah, those tracks to run on. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that made sense. It's kind of
No, it was
broadly
perfect.
talking about about specific things that I've worked on, but it's definitely
Yeah.
shifted over time.
No, it's actually perfect, and it's a great segue into what I really want to bring out in this particular conversation with you, Leah. And what you were saying is that a lot of times people want to do this good work, and I'll keep using that because that's the name of your podcast. Yeah, I
Sure.
want to I want to talk about that as well. But we want to do good work, and especially in network marketing. we often have something that, as you said, we're kind of trained to have some type of mission, to have some type of real reason that we're doing the work. What is our why? What is the thing behind why we're doing this in this business model? And a lot of people see what has happened before and they perpetuate the wrong instead of doing good work. They think that they're doing good work, but they often don't. And so what I really want to delve deep into is kind of some of those lessons learned that you talked about. You brought up terms like saviorism and these issues of taking pictures of people and putting them online and those types of things. And so we often talk about, how do we do the work, the good work in our teams? How do we build an inclusive culture? But for this, I really want to talk about how do we build that inclusive mission where we're going out and doing the good work and we're really being inclusive and kind of checking ourselves.
Yeah.
So what were some of those gut checks that you started to get specific?
Well, one that I can think of is when we reached a certain point in our kind of fundraising process with PC Money School, we were starting to expand more, and so we needed to do more fundraisers, and I hadn't fundraised at that level before, and so I went looking for other models of how it had been done. And it's like we gravitate towards what we can already see instead of imagining what could it look like, because I mean, God bless us, none of us want to start from scratch and try to think of something from the ground up. It's like, okay, well, this person ran a fundraiser in this way. Maybe I can reach out to them and see what worked, what didn't work, and how I could follow that same model. And I'm not talking specifically about this particular fundraiser that I have in mind, but as we went along that process, I would get advice as I went exploring what are some of the ways that I could, help us reach this goal of raising the money that we're trying to raise to build this kitchen at school, for example, right? And as I'm exploring and having conversations with other folks who have fundraised, essentially, I'm realizing, wait a minute, some of the strategies that I'm being suggested and encouraged to do, like gut check, this doesn't feel right. And one of the classic examples I can think of, is let's make sure that we show the abject poverty, right? Let's show the hardship. Okay, let's make sure that we highlight that so that we activate a sense of pity in a donor, and then they give. And I realized I do not want to participate in perpetuating that kind of fundraising cycle. And I'm sure that someone more academic than me probably has a name for that. But I didn't want to participate in perpetuating this, pity-inducing, cycle where we're giving out of a sense of pity, because pity feels to me like a looking down on. And I wanted to find a way, and I still do, it's always a work in progress, find a way to shift, the pity cycle to an empowerment cycle. And how can we, see our shared humanity and realize, what? It's just by the random selection of the universe that I was born where I was born, and you were born where you were born, and this is all, there's a lot that we can't control there, and let's recognize our shared humanity between people that exist in very different contexts, and let that feel empowering, and let it be driven by empowering people versus pitying them. So that's one example that I can think of where I realized I need to make sure and check every step of the way when we are sharing the story about this school, when we are communicating with other people about it, that when I see that cycle, I need to be the one to interrupt it. And sometimes finding the words to do that can be very challenging. It feels really foggy.
Yeah.
But
And I would suggest,
yeah.
there's a video that I often play, and it's called The Danger of a Single Story. And it's so good. And she talks about how she was told the story of this little boy, and the story made her think that he was just poor, he had nothing to give, he had no resources. And when she met him, she was like, wait a minute, he has all the things that I have. And he is, really resourceful, and he has a lot to give. And so I think that that is what happens, is that we we give the single story instead of the full story of people. And then that perpetuates the thought about them. We even do it in the history of our country, right? We tell a single story, we don't tell it from all perspectives. And there is serious danger in telling a single story. And it brings about this issue with power, because the storyteller has the power, right? They have the power to, change mindsets and thought processes. And so it's really important for us to first to think about who's telling the story, what pieces of the story are they telling, because that tells us where the power is, and we need to differentiate that. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that what you're bringing up right now is it helps me identify where some of the roadblocks have come, certainly in my nonprofit work, when I have really felt blocked around working on our next project or fundraising. It is because, I realize that in that role, I am the storyteller, and that comes with a great amount of, needs to be treated with a great amount of respect and care. And so, for the first time in 13 years, I am bringing in consultants, and, not just branding consultants, but, I'm bringing in consultants to help me hone in on how I can approach my role as storyteller about this project in a way that keeps the integrity of how we want to be working. Because a lot of it would kind of unfold organically, but I think once you realize that, wow, there's really something to work on here, then we need to be more intentional about it, and not just keep kind of tripping over ourselves and thinking, well, I'll make mistakes. And there's a lot of room for mistakes, and absolutely mistakes should be made and will be made. But if we can see the pothole coming, let's steer around it and not just drive right over it.
Exactly. So I'll back up then just a little bit, because we talked about your work that you do with our, and kind of how did you come to this point where you knew that you wanted to work in Tanzania, that you wanted to build these schools, you wanted to have that as part of the mission of the overall work that you do. So talk a little bit about how you combine what you did with network marketing with your bigger social mission.
Yeah, well, when I started my business, so, backing up to when I first started my Arbonne business, I was a recent college graduate. I'd gone to school for theater. I was pursuing an acting career, right? I was going on auditions, and I was doing plays in Chicago. And as my day job, I was teaching. So I worked as the permanent substitute at a K-8 school, and then I had my own tutoring students. And I was really busy, being really broke. And I thought, I need to figure out another way to support myself so that I can follow my passions, because as it turns out, most of the things I was passionate about did not come with a steady paycheck. And so that's what opened my mind to network marketing. And it was actually my dad who told me about Arbonne. He's not a consultant, but my dad worked when I was a baby. He was a college dropout and ran an auto parts shop in Vermont. And by the time I graduated from college, he was, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar finance company. So it was fascinating and inspiring to kind of watch his career as I was growing up, and the changes that he made for himself. So that built a lot of trust in my dad's recommendations, is my point. Sometimes we all have family members where we think, oh, we should take your advice and your opinions really matter because you're just a close person in my family. Yeah. And I'm sharing that because he is my dad, but also he had some serious bona fides. So when he called me up and was like, I think you should take a look at this company I just reviewed, Arbonne. I think you should take a look at doing a business like that. I bet if you worked hard at a business like that, you could have your cake and eat it too. I bet you could build something sustainable where you could have your time free to do all these things that you really love to do, that you're starting to feel like maybe I have to give them up because I can't pay my rent. And so he just planted that seed, and that's what sparked my curiosity about our industry. And from the beginning, it was always a vehicle to connect the dots. It was never an end in and of itself. It was, this is going to be my vehicle to give me control over my time so that I can pursue my passions and I can, be an artist without being a starving artist. And by the time I reached a sustainable point in my business where it became my main source of income, I was in my, mid-20s, and I didn't have a ton of responsibility. And I thought, well, I'm a person of integrity. I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. So if I have enough and I'm good, right? Instead of just going and trying to build bigger and more, I thought, I have my time free now. I don't have to go back to my teaching job. What am I going to do next? One of the first things I did was go and teach for free at this wonderful organization that did after school programs for kids in Chicago, where they would do homework help, followed by circus training. It was called Circus Team. If you're still out there, Circus Team, I think you're amazing. And it was really, it felt empowering to me to offer, to say, you know what, I would love to come and be an after school teacher at your program. And you know what, you don't have to pay me the $15 an hour or whatever it was. I want you to turn it around and put it back into this organization. And for me, that hour that I would spend working at that program, the feeling that I got of being able to give my time was such a good feeling that it really made me want more. And, giving, and let's be honest, giving feels good.
It does. Yes.
And so I wanted more of that. And when we had the chance to go to Tanzania for the first time, I just thought, well, I better say yes and go with no agenda and see if any opportunities arise. And it turns out that they did.
Yes. So I know that you help other people to kind of fulfill their mission and to do the same types of things. And so now that you had learned what you wanted to do, you knew you loved teaching, you did it in this smaller scale here in the US and with schools, and then you knew that this is what you wanted to do globally as well. So then where does a person start? So what are some things that you look for when you're wanting to be a truly inclusive networker, you're wanting to be global? and to really expand. You know that you've done it on a small scale here, but now you're ready to expand and start to do this globally.
What do you do first? Well, what I would do first is take a big old pause.
Okay.
And give some creative space to investigating, why am I drawn to this work? Me. And also, right, our why is important for sure. And also, if there's something that I feel drawn to doing, pause, give some perspective. Is there also a need that is arising without me that I could meet? Is there a need out there that actually requires my lens, my skill set, my, my drive? And if you can marry those two things together and approach it with humility, and as opposed to swooping in and saying, I'm here to save the world, then you'll know what the next right thing to do is. And that's why I say start with a pause, because when we jump to, I know what to do, I know what all the answers are, I know how to help, and I know what it looks like to help, and we swoop in, we miss the nuance of a community, of a situation, of a relationship that we are entering into. Because certainly for volunteers, volunteers only get thanked, right? And don't often have to answer to the same, I don't want to say standards, right? But volunteers usually just get thanked and don't have to approach, a work relationship or a project in the same way that we would if it was our, paying job, or if we had been hired to do it or invited to do it. And so it's really important to remember that when you're in a volunteer capacity or you're ready to give your time, that we keep the integrity of the same standards we would bring to our work, to that work, so that we don't kind of default to the models that we have in our culture of, particularly white folks swooping in and trying to save the day. So
that's so good as a first step. And I really want to emphasize what you just said, because it's so good to pause. And I often talk about this when I'm telling people, they're like, well, what do I do first with my diversity, equity, and inclusion work? Or how do I build an inclusive culture? And I say the same thing. You got to know your own lens. You got to know your own why and why you're doing things. And often saviorism happens because people they get excited, they go swoop in, they're like, I know exactly what you need. But then the issue with it is that it's self-serving, because it's something that we can say, oh, I feel better, I did something about it, versus really being there to tackle the true issue. So, if we're like, yeah, we're going and we're helping people, and these people are marginalized, they've been dealing with racism, and then we come back and we don't want to tackle the systems and the structures of racism, then that's saviorism, because it's only something that's helping us. It's not really tackling the real issue. It's let me come swoop in, do what I can do to make myself feel better. And I think that's so important for us to address, and an excellent first step that you're talking about, because we often think, well, what place do I go to start the work? Who do I get to coach me through this process? And it's like, you really got to just reflect first, right? Yes, I love that.
Yeah. Reflect first, let that process take as much time as it takes, because the challenges of the world are not going to go to sleep in that time. They'll still be there. when you finish that process, and when you do, and it is never, and again, it's never complete, but when you feel like, all right, I have taken ample respectful time to self-reflect and to hopefully marry the thing that is lighting me up with a true need that requires my skill, then you'll be able to more rapidly affect the change that you want to see anyway, right? Rather than, kind of bulldozing your way through and causing sometimes unnecessary collateral damage. And I say this with, all of the knowing that I made so many of these mistakes. And I can only recognize them in retrospect. And some of them are going back, 15 years and realizing, oh, well, of course, little baby Leah in a new country with only these models of how to behave, felt, like this was the very next step of how I should help here. And of course, you made this mistake and this mistake, and so I say this not from a space of perfectionism where it's like, well, I've done all of this perfectly. It's no, I have made all of these mistakes. And so, it's insight that is uncomfortably earned sometimes, but we have to be willing to embrace that discomfort, I think.
Yeah. So as we're doing this reflection, because I really want to make this practical for everybody and to help them to see, what kind of things they should be thinking about. And we talked about the why. We talked about the reason for going in. What are some things that we really need to think about before we take on a project where we want to really be a global inclusive networker?
Am I, who am I centering? Right? If we're thinking globally, really being aware, like you said at the beginning, of our own lens and being able to just kind of zoom out from ourselves and kind of look down on ourselves as we're having experiences. Let's say, you're entering into a new culture, a new country, a new context, and being able to recognize, oh, I'm having these judgments, thoughts, assumptions, ideas, intentions, and how does that relate to the lens that I'm looking through? And realizing that that's normal, and there's nothing wrong with you. It's not a character flaw that you have a lens. We all have one. That's the point. It's being able to be self-aware enough of how your lens is affecting the ideas that you're having, the assumptions that you're making, the feelings that are coming up for you, and having the capacity to, if I go to, I live in Boulder, Colorado now, so I just have to say too woo-woo for anybody, but, being able to actually like hold space for those feelings so that they don't spill out and, get all over everybody else all the time. I think that's where we need to start, is just with a sense of self-reflection and self-awareness as you start to walk on that path of doing whatever next, project or work that you're stepping into is. So that you can, like you said, self-reflect, check back in, certainly have some self-trust, and don't let all of this completely paralyze you. Otherwise we wouldn't get to learn from so many of the change makers that are out there. If they thought, oh, well, I haven't gotten it right yet, so I can't really do this, then don't let it paralyze you from doing anything, but just keep that awareness as you move through, and be open to learning and realizing that newsflash, we are not the center of our own universes.
Yeah, I love how this is kind of a framework that's coming out of this, because first it's let me understand my why, let me reflect on myself and why I'm even doing this, and
Mm-hmm.
then I need to think about who am I centering. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that question, who am I centering? Because is this about me? Or am I really focused on what I need to do for these individuals? And how do I learn from them, even though I'm looking through my lens? How do I separate what's happening in my lens to their reality, right?
Yes.
So often we see things and we're like, why would this person do this? Oh my goodness, they're oppressed. These things are happening. But in their culture, it doesn't feel that way to them at all. And so when we come in with our lens,
Yeah.
we really can offend or just harm, as you said before. And so I think that's really, really good, to truly look at who am I centering and how is my lens affecting my perception of this
Yeah.
environment and in this context.
Yeah. And it's been so interesting to be in collaboration with this school for so many years now, and to also see that some of these narratives go two ways, where
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, there are kind of there's an expected dynamic, and there's a framework that's kind of already been modeled about how we interact, you know, how we interact with a donor that's coming from
Mm-hmm.
abroad to support our project, and we must need to perform to
Mm-hmm.
in order to continue receiving this support. And so sometimes my role as it's unfolding now is also to name that, within a culture that is not my culture, and say, hey, we have a group that would love to come and visit school. I'm being very thoughtful about, who we open the gates to, and, give them a very clear guidelines around how, how it's appropriate to interact,
Mm-hmm.
with our school. And also, I want you to know, when I talk to our school head teacher and our staff, and when we are connecting, saying, listen, you don't need to uphold these dynamics on your side either, and you will
Mm-hmm.
still receive the support that we've agreed on, without, making your culture performative, or
Mm.
making
Yeah.
or making sure that put donors, and even me, right, up on a kind of hero pedestal in order for
Mm-hmm.
our work to continue together. And that's been a
Mm-hmm.
really, it's a really interesting and nuanced process to figure out how
Mm-hmm.
to also how to break down some of those dynamics in both directions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
been a fascinating and, yeah, humbling learning experience.
Yeah, so that's interesting because a lot of times, as people go in with the idea of saviorism, they think that they know. So, how do you help individuals who are about to embark on these types of um, projects or service that they want to do? How do you help them to see that they aren't the savior and that they really need to listen and learn and take that time, not only to reflect on themselves, but just to observe in the community? Don't go in, don't say anything, just observe. Let the community be the lead in
Mm-hmm.
this. How do you help people to get to that point? Because I think that um, I often say it's not your skill set, it's how your soul set, right?
Mm,
That really moves you forward in the
I
work
love
that
that
you're
so
doing.
much.
And yeah, and so um, how do you help people to see that it's not your skill set, it's how your soul set?
Oh, I love that so much. It's just a wonderful way of looking at all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, I always start with pause. But if I were to kind of breadcrumb it out, I would say. I'm gonna actually use a term that I learned from my friend Daniela Poppy Thornton, who was also a guest on my podcast recently. But she talks about apprenticing with a problem. So being an apprentice and really saying, even though I might be in a position of leadership, right, in this context, let's say, right, for me, I'm a leader in my network marketing business, right? I'm a leader. In this new context, I'm a learner, and shifting and being able to do that dance between you can be a leader by being a learner. So going in and apprenticing with a problem, no doubt, there are problems, there are challenges. We need all hands on deck, right? It's time for everybody to pitch in, and we need to work together to solve some of these things, 100%. And where you can start is having that learner's mindset instead of, and realizing that you can be a leader by being a learner, and that being a leader to help solve a problem doesn't always mean coming in with all the answers. I think it means coming in with great questions and being able to ask great questions of the community or the group or the person that you are working with. And, offering yourself as a helper, right? There's a difference in, putting a hand out and kind of yanking somebody up versus, putting your head down, offering your hand and saying, is this what you need? Watching, learning. And then when you join hands together, saying, okay, let's go together. Let's work together. I think that's the process that I would apply. And I think you could probably apply to a lot of different situations.
Well, that is phenomenal. Being an apprentice to the problem, and that leaders are learners. I think that that's the kind of drop mic moment, right? It's like that we really have to think about the fact that we are learning in every situation. There are some times when we do have more of the answers, but to be an inclusive networker, you have to be an apprentice to the problem and a leader who is a learner. That is good. That's it.
We found something there. I think we're onto something here, right?
That's good.
But truly, I think, with everything that you share, and I love your podcast so much, it's so needed in so many spaces, and particularly for network marketers. But we focus a lot on leadership in our industry, and it's a helpful reminder to me, at least, and I'll only speak for myself, as always, to remember that, leadership sometimes looks different than we think it's going to. And sometimes being an excellent leader means being willing to admit, I don't know. I don't know the answer.
And it's being able to shift. This is kind of coming to me in this moment is like, sometimes, with my child, I might be a leader and I might be able to say, this is the thing that needs to happen. Like, there's no question I'm coming in to tell you what to do because you're not able to think in a way that you need to process this, right? On a level of an adult. But then when I'm going to someone in another country, then my role becomes being the learner and the apprentice. When I'm working in some research that I'm doing and I'm leading a team, maybe I'm saying, okay, students, this is how you typically would do this. But then again, when I'm on my job doing another type of skill, then maybe I'm the apprentice again. But I can still be a leader in every one of those situations, but I have to shift the context of my leadership or the approach of my leadership based on the context. That's so good. Yeah, good. So, Leah, this has been an absolutely amazing conversation. I am so very grateful that you took the time to be on the Inclusive Networker podcast. And so, please tell us, how do we stay in touch with you? What's the big thing you've got coming up next? What do we need to do to just follow you, stay in touch with everything that you're doing in this space?
Oh, thank you. Well, right now, I'd say you can head over to podcast.leahleonard.me and check out the Good Work podcast. And we have some programs coming up that are really circling around a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. So I am about to launch a program where I can explore some of these questions of I want to start. I'm ready to move into a season of giving in my life and in my career. How do I connect those dots between, achieving my goal of doing good work and actually feeling fulfilled while I do it, while also causing no harm along the way. So I'm going to be leading a group through that process and actually modeling some of the things we talked about in real time in Tanzania at a visit to my school at the end of the program. So I'm excited to share about that, and it'll all be on my website when it's ready.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for the work that you've been doing, Leah. I'm so happy that you are really taking this on, and the challenge of ensuring that a different perspective is brought to this work is something that's formidable. And so I am very much appreciative of the fact that you are a person that says, I'm going to stand against these traditional methods that have been done, and I really want this to be truly inclusive and authentic to the communities that we serve. And so thank you for everything that you're doing, and I know that the communities that you serve will be blessed as well.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me. This has been so fun.
Yes. Well, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Inclusive Networker podcast. Thank you again to my guest, Leah Leonard. You can see all of her information down in the show notes, and I will see you on the next episode of the Inclusive Networker podcast. Bye.